Listen, family, sit closer to the screen for a second, because what I am about to walk you through is going to make everything you thought you understood about the Kendrick Lamar and Drake situation look like the trailer for a movie the world has not even started watching yet. Every single camera on Earth has been pointed at Aubrey Drake Graham for the last 18 months. Drake posting, Drake performing, Drake pouting, Drake filing lawsuits, Drake selling off pieces of his own publishing catalog like a man clearing out a garage before the landlord shows up, Drake live streaming, Drake subtweeting, Drake dropping 3 projects a year just to keep his own name inside the trending column for another 24 hours. And while every lens in the industry was locked on the Toronto entertainer, Kendrick Lamar quietly walked through a side door nobody was guarding, sat down in a room with no press releases and no leaked photos, and closed a partnership so structurally violent to the balance of power in modern culture that hip-hop is not going to recognize itself by the time this decade closes out. Now catch this, because if you blink, you are going to miss the biggest headline of the year. Kendrick Lamar just sat across from the National Basketball Players Association. Kendrick Lamar just sat across from Kyrie Irving. Kendrick Lamar just sat across from Stephen Curry, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell, Kawhi Leonard, and Jamal Murray. And Kendrick Lamar walked out of that room with a partnership so foundational, so architectural, so completely rewired around his own fingerprints that Drake, according to whispers already leaking out of Toronto, is reportedly not okay behind closed doors. Not annoyed, not disappointed, livid, because one of the men who has been photographed shoulder to shoulder with Drake for a full decade, the same Stephen Curry who used to be a fixture in every OVO courtside photograph, just picked the PG Lang canvas over the OVO gold, on camera, in front of the entire world, and did not even blink while doing it. So read that line twice, lock your jaw, and when I break down the cons premiere and the ownership structure sitting underneath this deal, you are going to understand why this is not a diss track, this is not a beef, this is not a subliminal, this is a silent takeover wearing a tailored suit. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. For months now, the same 3-word question has been ricocheting through every barbershop, every group chat, every reaction channel, every podcast, and every comment section in hip-hop. Where is Kendrick? No interviews, no Instagram stories, no I am outside energy, no staged photo runs through Soho, no rollout theatrics, no press tour circus. And Drake's loudest supporters called it fear, the gatekeepers called it laziness, the casual listeners called it irrelevance, the engagement farmers called it career suicide, and every single one of those people was wrong. I mean the kind of wrong that gets written into the history books with a red pen and a footnote. Because while the internet was refreshing its feed waiting for Kendrick Lamar to slip up, Kendrick Lamar was welding. Kendrick Lamar was drafting blueprints. Kendrick Lamar was wiring together an ownership structure so complete, so airtight, so quietly weaponized that no rapper in this generation is built to withstand what is coming next. Understand the stakes here for a second, because most people are still reading this like it is a music industry story, and it is not. This is a labor story. This is an ownership story. This is a culture war story, and the stakes stretch across 4 different rooms at the same time. There are musical stakes, because every rapper who has spent the last decade chasing brand deals now has to look at what Kendrick Lamar just did and ask themselves why they never even got in the room.
There are cultural stakes because the NBA and hip-hop have been in a symbiotic marketing relationship since the 1990s, and one man just quietly reached in and repositioned that entire pipeline. There are financial stakes because we are talking about the collective name, image, and likeness of more than 500 professional athletes, according to the NBPA's own numbers, all now flowing through a creative direction stamped by Kendrick Lamar and his partner Dave Free. And there are reputation stakes because Drake has spent the last decade trying to claim the NBA as his personal marketing arm, and one afternoon in the south of France just rewrote the story on who actually holds the pen. This is the moment, this is the pivot, and this is why we have to have the real conversation right now. So let me walk you through the surface evidence first, because you need to see the visible facts before we dig into the deeper machinery. Piece 1. On record, the National Basketball Players Association, the union representing every single active player in the league, officially announced a new commercial brand called Players United. That is not a rumor, that is not a subliminal, that is on the front page of the Hollywood Reporter and on Campaign, the international advertising trade publication. Players United launched as a full consumer-facing brand designed to, in the NBPA's own words, transform the collective influence of NBA players into products, partnerships, and global business opportunities. Piece 2. To announce the launch, the NBPA dropped a short film titled Own the Game, and the short film was not produced by an advertising agency, not by a sports marketing firm, not by a broadcast partner. It was produced by Project 3 Agency, the creative company owned and operated by Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free. Read that sentence again if you need to. Piece 3. That short film did not premiere on ESPN, did not premiere on TNT, did not open All-Star Weekend. It premiered at the Cannes Lions International Creativity Festival. Cannes, the advertising world's most prestigious global stage. The same festival that agencies fight tooth and nail to even get a nomination inside of. That is where Kendrick Lamar's fingerprints on this campaign were unveiled to the entire international creative industry. Piece 4. Kyrie Irving is the narrator of the film, not Stephen A. Smith, not Charles Barkley, not a broadcaster. Kyrie Irving, one of the most ideologically independent superstars in the entire league, delivers the voiceover, and the very first line out of his mouth in the spot is a thesis statement. Quote, "For too long, everyone profited from player culture except the players themselves." End quote. That is a manifesto. That is a declaration of war on every middleman, every agency, every sponsor, and every broadcaster who has ever taken a cut of a player's likeness. And Kyrie Irving is delivering that manifesto on top of visuals directed by Neil Farmer and produced by Kendrick Lamar's own agency. Now sit with the roster of players who agreed to appear in this thing, because the roster itself is the fifth piece of evidence, and honestly the most damning. The film features 22 active NBA players, and 11 of them are current or former All-Stars. That list includes Stephen Curry, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, Kawhi Leonard, Jamal Murray, and Jaren Jackson Jr. It also features Fred VanVleet, who is now the sitting president of the NBPA. Newly minted NBA champions Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns of the Knicks are in there. Rising stars like VJ Edgecombe, Yang Hansen, Denny Avdia, and Jared McCain are in there. Veterans like Mason Plumlee and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope are in there.
This is not a fringe partnership. This is the union standing behind Kendrick Lamar with the full weight of 500 active players and 11 All-Stars in one frame. And oh, do I have more for you. Because if you thought the surface layer was ugly for Drake's camp, you are not ready for the cultural layer. The stands in Toronto are not going to like what I am about to walk into next, because this is where the receipts start turning into a case file. Stay locked in, because the piece I am about to drop about the specific quote David Kelly, the CEO of PLYRS United, said about Kendrick Lamar is the moment that reframes every argument you have ever had about who actually won the last 2 years of hip-hop. Let me show you what the insiders are actually saying about this deal, because the cultural evidence is where the story stops being about a music beef and starts becoming about how the entire sports and entertainment industry is quietly picking a side. Cultural Piece 1. David Kelly, the incoming executive director of the NBPA and the CEO of PLYRS United, gave a direct interview to Campaign, the global advertising trade magazine. And what he said about Kendrick Lamar was not a compliment, it was a blueprint endorsement. Quote, Kendrick is excellent as an artist, but also has been able to take that authenticity, who he is and what he knows, and move it into other businesses and create other businesses. He is, on the music side, the personification of what we think so many of our guys are in the sports space and what we want the brand to represent. Kendrick is, in some ways, like an avatar for what it is that we're trying to build. End quote. Read that carefully. The union is not saying Kendrick Lamar is a cool rapper they want to license a song from. The union is saying Kendrick Lamar is the human model they are architecturally patterning their entire 500-player business on. Kendrick Lamar is the avatar. That word is not a throwaway. That is a load-bearing word. Cultural Piece 2. Fred Van Vliet, the sitting president of the NBPA, went on record himself. Quote, PLYRS United was born out of our desire to own a piece of the ecosystem we built, and we intend to bring fans to a side of the business that truly reflects player culture. End quote. Now translate that from union speak into English. What Fred Van Vliet just said is that the players are done being the labor and are ready to be the ownership class, and they picked Kendrick Lamar as the creative partner to tell that story on the world stage. Cultural Piece 3. Kyrie Irving, and I need you to understand what Kyrie Irving being the narrator actually means, because this is not a random cosign. Kyrie Irving has spent an entire decade refusing to be owned by any league, any broadcaster, any narrative he did not personally sign off on. Kyrie Irving is the same player who name-dropped Kendrick Lamar on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Kyrie Irving is the same player who left Nike to build with Anta on his own terms. Kyrie Irving is inside the NBA, the closest ideological analog to what Kendrick Lamar is inside hip-hop. Both men refuse the middleman. Both men refuse the leash. Both men refuse the corporate embrace. So when Kyrie Irving delivers the voiceover on the P.G. Lang-directed short film, what he is doing is handing Kendrick Lamar the one form of currency money cannot manufacture: locker room credibility. Cultural Piece 4. Stephen Curry, and this family is the one that has Toronto stewing right now. Stephen Curry has been in Drake's orbit for over a decade. The OVO photo ops, the courtside cameos, the Toronto to Warriors friendship pipeline. That alliance was one of the last credible sports bridges Drake still had left. And Stephen Curry just stood shoulder to shoulder with Kyrie Irving in a film narrated by a man Drake openly resents, produced by Kendrick Lamar's own agency, premiering at Cannes under a union banner that has publicly labeled Kendrick as their avatar. That is not a business decision. That is a public verdict. And now let me acknowledge the counter-arguments some of you are already typing in the comments, because I hear you. Some of you are going to say Stephen Curry did not choose Kendrick over Drake. Stephen Curry was just doing his union duty. Fair point, I hear it, but here is why that argument falls apart the second you look at the roster. Kawhi Leonard is in this film, and Kawhi has famously refused almost every marketing obligation in his career. Kawhi does not do this. Kawhi did this.
Donovan Mitchell is in this film. Karl Anthony Towns is in this film. Jalen Brunson, 1 week removed from a championship, is in this film. When players who normally have the pull to opt out of union marketing say yes, that is a signal. That is the players quietly telling the industry which side of the room they are standing on. And the room they are standing in is the PG Lang room. That is not a union obligation. That is a union preference. And that preference has a name: Kendrick Lamar. So now we have to have the harder conversation, because if you've been treating this like a music story, you've been reading it on the wrong terms.
Anyway, moving on, because this stopped being a rap conversation the second the Cannes premiere hit. Let me shift the gear on you, because everything I have shown you up to this point has been the visible part of the machinery. Now I want to walk you through the actual industrial engine sitting underneath this deal, and I want you to understand 3 separate systemic angles at the same time. Angle 1, ownership structure. Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free own Project 3 agency outright. That is not a joint venture. That is not a subsidiary of a major label. That is not a licensing arm of Universal Music Group. That is not tucked under Interscope, under Polygram, under any of the multinationals that own most of the visible creative shops on Earth. Project 3, according to public reporting from NME and multiple industry outlets, is a fully owned, fully independent, multidisciplinary creative agency founded by Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free, with PG Lang as its cultural anchor. And what that means in real business terms is that when the NBPA hired Project 3 to produce Own the Game, they were not writing a check to a Madison Avenue holding company. They were writing a check directly to Kendrick Lamar's balance sheet. Every dollar that Union spends on this campaign, every dollar the future partnerships spend, every dollar that flows through this creative pipeline lands inside an ownership structure with 2 names on the door: Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free. That is generational wealth architecture. Compare that to how the industry has historically worked, where the biggest creative shops are owned by holding companies like WPP, Omnicom, and Publicis, all of which are publicly traded and report to shareholders who have never touched a microphone in their lives. Kendrick Lamar just cut every one of those parasites out of the flow. Angle 2, the direct-to-consumer economy. This is where the deal detonates. PLYRSUNT is not a licensing arm. It is a direct-to-consumer brand. That distinction is not semantic. That distinction is everything. The NBPA's previous business arm was called Think 450, and Think 450 was a business-to-business licensing operation, which means it sold player likeness rights to corporations and took a cut. Players UNT replaces Think 450 entirely, according to Campaign's reporting, and instead of renting player likenesses to Nike or Gatorade, Players UNT is designed to sell products, content, events, and experiences directly to fans. That is a fundamentally different business. That is the same model that turned Fenty into a billion-dollar company for Rihanna. That is the same model that turned Skims into a category-defining brand for Kim Kardashian. That is the same model Kendrick Lamar has been running through PG Lang for years, where the artist owns the audience relationship directly and refuses to hand it off to a distributor or a broadcaster. So the union just adopted Kendrick Lamar's business model wholesale and made him the creative custodian of the transition. Do you understand how catastrophic this is for the traditional sports marketing ecosystem? Every advertising holding company in Manhattan just lost a client. Every sports marketing firm in Los Angeles just watched their pitch deck get shredded on the Cannes stage. And every rapper still signing 360 deals with a major label just watched a peer walk into a room with the most powerful union in professional sports and become the reference point for what independence actually looks like. Angle 3, the Cannes premiere as a strategic weapon, because this is the piece nobody is talking about with the correct weight. When you premiere a short film at Cannes Lions, you are not premiering it for basketball fans. You are premiering it for the global creative industry. You are premiering it for every advertising agency, every brand executive, every media buyer, and every strategist who determines where marketing budgets flow for the next decade. And what those decision makers saw on that Cannes screen was not a shoe commercial. They saw a Kendrick Lamar-produced, Kyrie Irving narrated 22-player manifesto declaring that the athletes are done being the billboard and are ready to be the company.
That premiere was not a launch. That premiere was a signal flare, and every player association on the planet just received it. The NFL is watching. Major League Baseball is watching. The WNBA is watching. The Premier League is watching. The next time any of those unions decides to launch a direct-to-consumer arm, whose phone rings first? Kendrick Lamar's phone, Dave Free's phone, Project 3's phone. That is a turbine. That is a machine that once you spin it up, it keeps rotating on its own momentum, pulling more capital, more credibility, and more cultural gravity into Kendrick Lamar's universe with every rotation. Drake does not have a turbine. Drake has a treadmill. Those are not the same machine. A treadmill demands you wake up every morning and feed it. A turbine feeds itself. That is the mechanical difference between a career and an empire. And here is the truth bomb, family, the one nobody in the mainstream coverage is willing to say out loud with their whole chest. Kendrick Lamar did not become this generation's Jay-Z. Kendrick Lamar became something Jay-Z was never structurally allowed to be. And I know that sentence is going to hurt some of you, and I don't care, because the arithmetic backs it up. Jay-Z built a genuine empire, and nobody with a functioning brain is denying that. But look at the load-bearing beams of that empire. Roc Nation is threaded through Live Nation, a publicly traded corporation. Tidal was tethered to Sprint and then dissolved into Jack Dorsey's Square. The Roc Nation Sports Agency operates inside the regulatory architecture of the major professional leagues. Jay-Z had to play inside the corporate machine to win, and Jay-Z absolutely won. But every single foundational deal Jay-Z ever cut had a corporate parent standing over his shoulder holding a percentage. Kendrick Lamar does not have a corporate parent. PG Lang is not a joint venture. Project 3 Agency is not a subsidiary. Neither company is licensed to a major label, syndicated through a holding company, or bound to any external ownership structure that limits their creative or financial autonomy. Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free are not employees of the system. They are the system, and that's why the NBPA deal
detonates at a level most observers still have not processed. This is not Kendrick Lamar joining a corporation. This is the most powerful union in professional sports walking up to Kendrick Lamar and asking for a seat at his table. So take Jay-Z's business intelligence, add Kanye West's creative ambition, subtract Kanye's chaos, subtract Jay-Z's corporate handcuffs, subtract every compromise either of them ever had to sign to get through a boardroom door. What is left, distilled, refined, and quietly weaponized is Kendrick Lamar. And that is the version Drake has no counter for, no diss for, no album for, no press cycle for. And it gets worse for the Toronto camp, because remember what Drake has spent the last 18 months doing. Drake has been publicly liquidating pieces of his catalog through a reported deal with a private equity vehicle, according to multiple industry outlets. Drake has been dropping album after album to defend his position in the algorithm. Drake has been on Instagram every waking hour performing for the feed. Now flip the frame. While Drake was selling equity in his own past, Kendrick Lamar was buying equity in an entire league's future. While Drake was chasing streams, Kendrick Lamar was engineering ownership structures that outlived the streaming era entirely. While Drake was reminding the world he still exists, Kendrick Lamar was reminding the world what actual power looks like when it stops asking for permission. That is not a diss track. That is a hostile acquisition disguised as a smile. And every rapper currently signing a 360 deal with a major label right now should be terrified, because Kendrick Lamar has just redrawn the map of what is possible, and most of the genre is standing on the wrong side of the new border. So where does this leave the hero of the story? It leaves Kendrick Lamar exactly where the discipline was always going to land him, in the room, on the wall, owning the frame. Every choice Kendrick Lamar has made for the last 5 years, choices the internet openly mocked at the time, is now producing compound interest in real time. When Kendrick Lamar went quiet after the beef, the internet said he was scared. Wrong. He was building. When Kendrick Lamar refused to do a media tour after Not Like Us, the internet said he was avoiding the moment. Wrong. He was pricing the moment. When Kendrick Lamar directed music videos for Baby Keem and SZA in that same dust-soaked, patient, cinematic visual language, the internet said it was pretentious. Wrong. He was building the visual grammar that would eventually get premiered at Cannes.
Every single move looked strange in isolation and inevitable in retrospect. That is what discipline looks like. That is what an operator looks like when he is playing on a longer clock than everybody else in the room. And the contrast one-liner writes itself. One man makes music that begs for the algorithm's approval. The other man makes music that gets endorsed by the union representing every athlete in the most globally consumed professional league on earth. One man is trying to trend for 24 hours. The other man is trying to be studied in business schools for 24 years. Sit with that, because when the historians write the case study on how professional athletes finally seized the economic controls of their own labor in the 2020s, they are not going to be writing chapters on who had the catchier single. They are going to be diagramming the room where Kendrick Lamar, Dave Free, Kyrie Irving, Stephen Curry, Fred VanVleet, and David Kelly agreed to build a direct-to-consumer economy together under the PLYRUNT banner. They are going to be reverse engineering Project 3 agency. They are going to be tracing PG Lang. And the rappers who signed away their catalogs while Kendrick Lamar was building this, those rappers will be the footnotes in those chapters, not the headlines, the footnotes. The right person is winning. The right person was always going to win. The evidence has been in front of us the whole time, and this Cannes premiere just made it undeniable. Things are going to be okay for hip-hop, family. The culture is course-correcting, the builder is beating the performer, and the union just co-signed it on the record. And this is only the start, because think about what has not happened yet. The PLYRUNT Performance Center, the 24-hour training facility in Los Angeles, built out of the former Clippers training complex, opens as a live venue this summer and is going to host content shoots, brand activations, and player-led programming for the foreseeable future. Every one of those events is another opportunity for Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free to keep stamping their creative fingerprint on the league. That is one concrete development to watch. Second concrete development, the next iteration of PLYRUNT's Players House, according to Campaign, is scheduled to appear during the 2026 NBA Summer League, with programming led by Jaylen Brown and Kyle Kuzma, which means more players, more content, more direct-to-consumer experiences, and every one of them routed through the creative architecture Kendrick Lamar just built. Track those two milestones and you will watch this partnership grow in real time. Tap that like button if this video handed you a piece of the story you were not getting anywhere else in hip-hop commentary. Tap subscribe so you get the truth before the rest of the internet catches up to it. Ring the bell because the next chapter of the Kendrick Lamar story is loading, and you don't want to be the last person in your group chat to find out. And before you swipe away, sit with me on one more thought, because it's the one that keeps me up at night. If Kendrick Lamar has already done all of this without dropping a verse, without shooting a vlog, without doing a single press run, and without saying one word into a microphone about it, what happens the day Kendrick Lamar actually decides to speak again? What happens the day the album lands, the day the tour opens, the day PG Lang announces its next signing? What happens when the executive era was just the warm-up? Because that's the video I'm dropping next, and I promise you, once you see the connection between the PG Lang film catalog, the PLYRUNT client list, and one specific unreleased visual that has already been storyboarded according to two separate industry sources, you're going to understand why Drake's team is not just worried about the next Kendrick album, they're worried about the next Kendrick decade. Click that video the second this one ends. I'll see you inside. Stay locked in.